All set.
My name is Rick Leaf. I'm Chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. This open meeting of the Master Plan Implementation Committee is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency signed into law on March 29th, 2023. This meeting will be conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance by members of the public will be permitted. All members of the Master Plan Implementation Committee are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The act allows the Master Plan Implementation Committee to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Members of the public who wish to view the live stream of this meeting may do so by going to Northborough Remote Meetings on YouTube via the link listed on the agenda. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. Having said that, I will take attendance here. Julianne Hirsch,
I'm here.
Amy Paretsky,
Here.
Millie Milton, we said is not here tonight. Ashley, we know, is not here. Tracy is not here. Fran Baxter,
Here.
Jean Kennedy,
Here.
Jean Cahill,
Here.
Rick Leaf is here. John Campbell, we know is here. John is here. And Jen Tolman. Are you muted, Jen?
She left and now she's coming back in. I just got a ping for her.
We're calling roll here. Jen, can you say you're here?
You're on mute, Jen.
Unmute. Okay, I'm on my phone. Sorry. Hi, I'm here.
Okay, good, thanks. Okay. So we did confirm we have a quorum. Okay, first item on the agenda tonight is an update on the Economic Development Forum that was held in December. As you recall, the MPIC sent a letter to the select board, encourage them to meet jointly with the land use boards to talk about economic development and those goals in the master plan around economic development that hadn't been addressed to this point. And in fact, that joint meeting of the three boards, the select board, the planning board, and the zoning board of appeals, was held on December 12th, I think it was. And just want to spend a few minutes and just update people on the committee about what happened at that meeting and what the next steps of that are. So, Laura, do you want to start with a quick update?
Yeah, sure. So I'm happy to report that we had full attendance by all of the three board members. So I was really excited about that. And people seemed to be really engaged and open to conversation and really discussing the issues. So I thought that Carrie Salwa from CMRPC did a good job. She started off with a PowerPoint presentation, which I have forwarded to all of you. There was an analysis of the survey questions that was included in her PowerPoint presentation. So the CMRPC had prepared a online survey for all of the board members to respond to. And thankfully, we also received 100% response rate on that survey. So grateful to all the board members for being engaged. And so there was quite a bit of back and forth about the various issues. There was discussion about what the priorities were At the end of the meeting, Carrie had distributed another survey that kind of captured people's feelings about various economic development issues at the end of the conversation. Really, I guess the point of that was kind of to see if people had changed their minds on certain issues as the conversation progressed. So the results of that survey showed the economic development actions ranked in order of priority. Number 1 was create a Northborough Economic Development Committee. Number 2 was focus attention on 4 West Main Street and a reuse plan. Number 3 was concentrate on the gateways to our community, for example, downtown, Route 9, Route 20. 4, focus attention. Oh, actually, I got 4 West Main Street twice. 5, explore hospitality uses along the Route 9 corridor. 6, work towards further activating the Aqueduct Trail for connectivity. 7, this was interesting. 7 was hire an economic development coordinator for Northborough. And 8 was create an industrial property study. So then there was some additional comments that folks made on the survey, which we captured here. So at the end of the day, I think ultimately folks decided that more work needed to be done on economic development issues. So CMRPC, so the director of CMRPC, the executive director, Janet, was there, and she offered up the services of CMRPC to do additional work. Unfortunately, Carrie was on vacation for a huge amount of the time after this workshop, so we haven't developed a scope of work as of yet. But we are going to apply for technical assistance to further the conversation and try to come up with a greater refinement on action steps. But those were kind of my impressions. Of course, Rick, you were there, Amy, Julianne, Fran, Jean, I believe you were there as well. So if you want to add to the conversation, I turn it
I
over
guess
to
I'd
you.
be interested in maybe having Julianne and Amy comment also being board members who are there. Julianne, anything you want to add to what Laurie said?
Just that I thought that there was some surprising but great information that applies to us very nicely, and the opportunities for ecotourism, which with our trails and potential waterways, it'd be nice to be able to capitalize on that, as well as the comment she made about the Central Mass being a hotel desert, which I was surprised at, but obviously that's another opportunity. And I guess the last thing I would say is there did seem to be some differences of opinion about whether or not to hire an economic development person. And so I guess that would have to be looked into a little bit more to see if you hire someone like in that position, is it almost like they would bring in so much activity that that their position would almost be paid for? Because I think that was the reluctance, was another staff person. But if that person was charged with getting grants and things like that, maybe it would be people would be more agreeable to it. So those were my additions. Thanks.
How about Amy, from your perspective?
I mean, I really feel like Lori and Julianne just covered it all. I also was glad that everybody showed up. I thought that showed the dedication that the volunteers have to Northborough. And then the people in the audience too were all from other boards. So I don't know. I just thought it was a great showing. I thought Carrie Salwa did a great job. And I don't know, I thought Julianne, you just added a whole bunch of great things. I don't know. I thought it went well overall. And I know Carrie Sala has talked about how important the trails are to economic development in the town. And then last week, the select board and the week before, the planning board had Don Byrne from West Berlin talking about the Bee Wald and opportunities for the trails in North Berlin. So I think it all played in on that. I don't know. I thought you guys covered it all though. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay. Yeah, my impression was it was a good conversation. I think that the facilitator did a nice job on leading the conversation and keeping things moving. There definitely was not agreement from everybody on the different boards about everything. There were differences of opinions on different things raised. I think that some of us that were not on the board sitting there tried to make the point that having an agreed upon economic development plan as to where the town wanted to go might be an important first step in advance of either putting a committee together to manage economic development or hiring a staff person to do it. So there'd be a roadmap that was sort of generally agreed upon by the select board and the land use boards as the direction we wanted to take the town in. And then a committee or a staff person's job would be to implement kind of what's on that plan kind of thing. We kind of felt that in the absence of that, we'd run the risk of having a fairly energetic economic development committee or person coming in, and every time an idea was raised, it didn't really meet the approval of some or all of the people of the decision makers, which then kind of set everything back. So before we started to get everybody really excited about economic development, it might be a good idea to have an agreed upon general approach we want to follow. My sense was that Carrie said that maybe that was something that CMRPC could help us do, would be to sort of create that plan that would be agreeable to the three major decision-making boards in town. So I kind of took that away, something that an expectation I kind of have that maybe that would be a next step we get from CMs. I always get the letters in the wrong order there.
CMRPC.
Central Mass Regional Planning Commission, that they would help us develop, a plan. And then from there, we could decide how to implement it. If that meant a committee or a staff person or whatever, we could do that. So that was kind of my takeaway. Other,
What are you thinking on the plan? Like I guess being on one of the boards, I'm confused by what you want a plan to come forward that says what you think should be approved by the boards?
well,
Like
let's talk about, well, there's disagreement about how much sewer infrastructure we should have in town, and yet certain parts of economic development probably going to depend on extending the sewer infrastructure. So there ought to be some agreement that this is how much more sewer we're going to build and where we're going to build it. Oh, no, we're not going to build any more sewer. We've got enough. We don't want to, everything else we're going to do is going to be done on private septic. And that would be an important thing for an economic development committee, a coordinator to know. And there could be other things around infrastructure as far as that goes. So I think things like that, I think, are important to set a direction for where the town wants to go. I think CMRPC could line out a number of things they would feel important that the town would have to decide upon before we launched on trying to attract certain kinds of businesses and where we want to put them. So that's just one example. I'm sure there are others besides that. So the plan would include, to my mind, that kind of stuff. Other comments
Rick,
from
if I
people
could
who
just,
either read the minutes or all these things like that. Go ahead, Fran.
I just want to say, I think the biggest takeaway is that there's no, I think it was great that all three boards were there and were able to express their, either individual, not necessarily collective views. But there's no right or wrong answer. And I think that that's the biggest struggle, right? Because economic development are just two words that go together that can mean two very different things. And so I think when we get to the other items on our agenda with the housing plan and the letter to the boards that Amy and Jean worked on, is saying just that. Before you put together a board of volunteers to try to move forward on economic development, what direction are we going to go in? Because there was a lot of diverse thoughts, and there just is not a right or wrong answer. But until we figure out a path, we can't move forward.
Thanks, Ray. Other comments from other people that either attended or read any of the material that Lori sent out? Well, I think, like I said, the next step is to see what CMRPC comes back with in terms of what they could do next and what they would do, and sort of work towards that. That can, I think, come back probably through the town administrator to work through the select board and the land use boards to sort of move that forward, get some agreement as to how much more we want them to do, how much we have credits that they could do for us, and how much we'd have to pay for, and so we go next. But I think, and once again, I think what we did, once again, my view of what our job is as an advisory board here is that we raise the issues. I think we caused this joint meeting to happen, which was a good idea. It's really not our purview to tell the town what to do next, except to say that, we indicated there were certain goals in the master plan that had yet to have anything done about them. And this is a step in that direction. So I think, we can just watch this, and to the extent that what starts to develop out this starts to address some of these goals in the plan, we can start to write updates into the plan as to what happened and, close some of these things out or just keep adding additional updating information, at least where we can feel comfortable that we are helping the town make progress on the economic development goals in the plan.
There
So I think-
was an interesting opportunity that presented itself this week. So I received a phone call from the Southborough Economic Development Director. She and the town of Westboro are submitting a grant application through the One Stop program, which is due in June, first week of June, for a Route 9 corridor study. And she asked if the town of Northborough would be interested in joining forces with them. So we talked back and forth, and I expressed to her that some of the interests that we have regarding Route 9 have to do with the Bewalt Trail, as well as sewer capacity to Route 9. And of course, I had mentioned that we just did a rezoning exercise for a large portion of Route 20, as well as the O'Connell Lodge. We included that within our MBTA district. So zoning wasn't as much of an interest to me specifically as some of the other components, figuring out how to improve multimodal transportation. Of course, I had mentioned that Westboro and Northborough had been included within the recent WRTA study, which looked at bringing transit to Route 9. So I just kind of put that out there to you folks. I haven't committed one way or the other. Of course, I am scheduled to have a conversation with Stephanie, the town administrator, about this next week, and Scott Charpentier. But I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about whether you think it would be beneficial for us to join forces with our neighboring communities to kind of really look at Route 9 and think about what the possibilities are and actions that we could take to improve our gateway.
I think it's a good idea, but our sections definitely aren't as big as theirs. Like ours go from like Walmart to Southwest Cutoff, right?
Yeah. And of course, I mean, we have some really important, like Walmart, and of course we have Northborough Crossing. So that is, they of course understand how tiny our piece is compared to theirs, and some of the issues that they're grappling with are vacant industrial parks, like office buildings, and of course that's not our issue, at least along Route 9. So there are some differences But then, of course, I'm like, man, it'd be really good to collaborate with our neighboring communities and kind of figure out what they're doing, so that we can work together to maybe elevate Route 9 regionally, and not just think about our own tiny little section.
Right.
But I'm happy to hear your thoughts.
Laurie, did you say the woman you spoke to was the economic development planner for Southborough?
Yes.
Is she in addition to a planning director, or is she the town planner?
No, she is a separate position. So they have a planning director or a town planner, and they have her. So she's
Is it-
new. So she started about a year ago, maybe
Is it
2
a
years
full-time
ago.
job?
Full-time job.
Or maybe there's an opportunity to collaborate with Southborough on sharing an economic development planner if we get down the road and there's discussion about the cost of hiring a new person, and she's been in her position for a few years, and maybe or maybe not, they consider it a full-time position. So that's worth probably keeping in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I agree. I think, Lori, I think it's a great opportunity. Even if our little section wouldn't benefit from it much, it's also, a start to establishing, indicating that Northborough it wants to keep working with the towns, because working, by ourselves on everything is, it's I think the state and grants and things like that love when communities work together. So yeah, I think you should definitely move forward.
All right. And of course, I would go to the selectmen to ask for a support letter. So this just came up this week, which is why this group is hearing about it before the selectmen is hearing about it. But absolutely, that's my goal, to bring it to the selectmen. So any other comments on that?
I mean, I would agree that there's nothing to lose by getting involved, seeing what's going on here, and we learn a few interesting things, and that may play into interesting information that could help sort of help us with our own economic development planning in town as to what the opportunities might be, or what Westboro and Southborough are planning on doing might play into what we want to do. So I think it's worthwhile thing to do.
Lori, what you said about empty office space, that's very interesting. Did they indicate, is it because of people working from home or just company?
Yes. Yes, that's what they said, that they said that they've got these office parks where these buildings are largely empty or completely underutilized because of the change since COVID, with so many people working from home, or they might be working from home and only going into the office 1 or 2 days a week.
Mhm.
So they're looking for opportunities to reuse these buildings. So their zoning currently doesn't permit many options. So a big part of what Southborough was interested in doing is having like a zoning review to figure out what would be most appropriate to rezone these properties for, to make use of these office buildings that are vacant.
Mm. Another trend to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for those updates. I think, like I said, having this meeting actually happen in December, I think indicates the importance of the work that we're trying to do on this committee to keep the master plan in front of the decision makers in town and to continue to advocate to keep moving forward with things. But once again, the actual decisions on what will be done what the plan for economic development is, how it's going to roll out, that will fall, to the select board and the land use boards over time. Our job is just to keep an eye on those particular goals in the master plan, get updates on how they're going, and continue to feedback to the town about how we're doing on them. But I think the fact that that meeting actually happened in December is a credit to, what our committee is trying to do to keep the master plan moving in town. Okay, so having said that, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the downtown streetscape project, which Lori is doing a nice job moving along here. So let's get an update from Lori on that.
Yeah, that project is, well, in my opinion, it's fun. It's exciting to see what the design team is coming up with. We've had, well, I suppose on Tuesday we had our fourth focus group meeting. So we meet once a month. We have, in addition to the beta group, we've been working with the property manager and her engineer for 10 and 14 Blake Street. So they are interested in making significant improvements to their parking lot. So they want to do outdoor patio seating, as well as stripe their parking lot, decrease the amount of impervious surface, create a parking lot that makes more sense and is more in line with what we're hoping to do in the municipal parking lot. So all of that is good news. We've
Just
kind of been
interrupt for a
going
second.
off.
Just to interrupt for a second. So we're talking about the Fatouche restaurant and the doggy daycare place. Those are the two businesses we're talking about here.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm so used to calling them 10 and 14. So
Yeah.
of course you guys wouldn't know what properties I'm talking about. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So one of the debates that we're having right now has to do with which side of the street the off-street parking will be on. So one of the limiting factors has to do with the sidewalk on the east side of Blake Street, which the property owner doesn't want the sidewalk. We'd have to, if we have the on-street parking on the east side of Blake Street, then the sidewalk would have to be on private property with an easement. If we put the parking on the west side of Blake Street, then we can fit the sidewalk within the limits of the right of way, but it decreases the number of parking spaces we can ultimately accommodate because of all of the driveway openings as well as the telephone poles that exist there. We did look at burying the utilities, but the price tag that we received from National Grid for just the preliminary design work was $50,000. And for the actual construction itself, it was upwards of $1 million. So we ultimately abandoned burying the utilities because that would have to come out of taxpayer funds. There are no grants available for that type of work. So at this point, we're just kind of refining the design and preparing for the community outreach meeting, which is going to occur on the last week of February. I'm still waiting for a couple of responses from members. Most likely it will be on Thursday, February 27th at 6:30 p.m. So if you guys could mark your calendars. I will send out a definitive date and time when I have it. I have already reserved the library for two potential dates, the 26th and the 27th, so that we won't be out of luck if we wait too long and somebody books it out from under us. So I'm hoping that everybody will be able to attend that community outreach meeting because getting good community feedback is essential at this point. So what they're going to do is collect the feedback that we receive at that meeting, and then they're going to refine the plans and then really go into the heavy engineering at that point. So we want to make sure that if we need to change direction, we do it at this point in the design instead of when we get further down after they've already invested a lot of time and money in refining the design. So anybody else? Of course, we've got half of this group is on the focus group. So happy to turn it over to anybody else who wants to add something.
Yeah, I'll comment for a second. I've been impressed with the work that the data group has been doing as far as ideas they're generating for how to improve the general appearance of that Blake Street corridor. They've got some good ideas for what's the current pocket park on the corner of Blake Street and Main, and some other ideas across the street around where the 4 West Main Street building is. Also some work to improve the public parking down at the intersection of Hudson Street and Pierce Street. That section of Pierce Street off of Blake that goes down to that public parking area is part of this design. And of course, running a sidewalk on the east side of Blake Street that would sort of connect the Hudson Street neighborhood back into Blake Street, I think would be an important design characteristic. As Lori said, there's some discussion going on about where to put that sidewalk and, you know, how we could manage on-street parking and a sidewalk on the east side and do it to the agreement of the property owner there. For one person owns both the property of the doggy den and the restaurant is on. But I was also enthused to see was that they've taken it upon themselves, that property owner and her representative, to do quite a bit of improvement to their property, putting in a lot of more landscaping, redoing the parking to make it look more appropriate, including some outdoor dining, which I think is right in line with where I see, or where I think the committee and the people who responded to the downtown revitalization thought that kind of stuff was what they wanted to see in town, you know, restaurants and that kind of ability to do that. So even if the rest of Blake Street doesn't have a lot of redesign right off the bat as far as the other businesses, if those two businesses are already reaching out to do something, it could send a good signal to other business owners around there as to what some opportunities might be, or if those businesses turn over, it's a model for what could be done. But just without even a lot of changing over the existing space of the businesses, I think what they're designing would make Blake Street look a lot nicer as you viewed it from Main Street looking down Blake. There's a lot of ideas about how to make that look nicer, and that would play into other improvements could be made over time. And if it's true that if people see things are improving, they're motivated to want to improve their own property, which is what we've heard from the consultants in the past, that's kind of what happens. We're kind of already seeing that, you know, down at 10 and 14 Blake, and could happen in other places. So although there's still a lot of decisions have to be made, I think this project seems to be moving in the right direction. It seems we have a good partner in Beta Group to help us move down the path. So that's kind of my impression, but I'll open the floor up to Jean or Julianne or Amy for their comments.
I just say it's more than a street design and street reconstruction. It's actually remaking the street plus 50% of that area, because between the two commercial properties at the end on the east side, a new municipal parking lot redesigned and landscaped, and a pocket park which would be refurbished, redesigned, and improved. That's quite a substantial improvement for that key piece of downtown. So it's more than just a Beta civil engineering redesign of a street. So I agree with what Rick and Laurie said. There's a lot of potential there to meet some of the goals that we had identified in the downtown plan.
Julianne, Amy, any comments?
Yeah, so I agree with both of you, and the beta group really is they're so receptive, and I think they have some great ideas. But two things. Number one, for a long time, people have talked about burying the power lines, and I wonder if like we could just get a sense of what people think. $1 million sounds like a lot of money, but these days, is it a lot of money? And maybe people would say, oh, yeah, if you're going to make this beautiful street, you might as well do it completely, completely right. So I might see what the temperature is about that. Um, but the other thing is that I was thinking about later that I'm a little concerned about is I think people are going to ask, what is the plan for 4 West Main? Because that's the anchor building there, and what is the answer to that?
Well, of course, 4 West Main is not within Beta Group's scope of work.
Right.
So, of course, the selectmen, I will ask you, Julianne, what is the selectmen approach to 4 West Main? Because I think that the selectmen really are going to direct what happens there.
So one of the goals we set is that we would find uses for our empty buildings. And the tricky thing is that well, I guess I can only speak for myself. I think that the empty buildings have to be considered together. For West Main, White Cliffs, and whatever happens with White Cliffs, does that leave the current town hall empty? So, so point well taken. I guess we're going to have a discussion about that, and at least have some possibilities and a plan for how we're going to figure this out.
And I would add to those 3 buildings, the fire station on Pierce Street.
Right. Good point. Yeah. Because it's almost like musical buildings if something goes there.
But I think it's also valid to say that independent of a decision as to what happens to 4 West Main, there's nothing that's going to be done in this Blake Street redesign that would prevent any decision in the future being made for West Main Street that would make sense to the town, kind of thing. So there's a certain independence between the projects. Certainly, from my perspective, I would agree with you. I would view the work we're doing on Blake Street as the beginning of opening up that one catalyst scenario that was in the downtown revitalization plan. That outlined 4 West Main down Blake Street to Pierce and back to the existing fire station as a catalyst area. And so I would view the work being done on Blake Street as step one to open up that catalyst area. And to the extent that it becomes clear what's going to happen to the other buildings sooner than later, that's even better. That helps to even further define what that's going to look like. But even if those decisions aren't ready to be made at this point, the work that's being done is going to make that particular corridor attractive and useful for whatever happens down the road, kind of thing. So I think we can present it, if a lot of questions about any of those other buildings, to say that this is just setting the stage for the future use, and for whatever reason, more time has to go before decisions are made on those buildings. I'm
Just had a
hopeful,
quick
though.
comment too.
Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Oh, it's not a big comment, but I was thinking while I was listening to you guys talking that with the meeting coming up, when the date and time are set, maybe a copy of the design, because the design is really nice, could be sent out to the other building owners on that street and give them a personal invitation to attend the community outreach meeting, because they might not live in town, they might not know about it, but they might help get them excited too, to see what's happening and include them in the meeting.
Yes, my
Yeah.
plan is, so I've made a project flyer. And of course, the design concept that we have, at whatever state it is at the next meeting, would be distributed, as well as a workshop flyer. So I plan on going door to door and specifically inviting, giving them my business card and inviting them to come and, um, telling them how important their thoughts are to this process. I'm really hoping that the new owner of the building with the bowling alley will get excited and maybe want to do something with their property.
Lori, does the beta groups work in any way preclude the Catalyst area from being built out as was envisioned in the downtown revitalization study? Does it constrain at all what those buildings that are currently one story, wouldn't be convertible in the future or anything like that?
Well, we really have to rely on the property owners because it is private property. So they really decide whether they want their buildings to stay the way they are, or whether they want to demolish them and start new. So my concern is more about the streetscape, so what the town has control over. And the big difference between what is being proposed at this point and the Catalyst area, as Weston and Sampson envisioned it, is they wanted to pretty much eliminate the vast majority of the municipal parking on Blake Street and replace it with a very large common area. And the proposal as it exists today includes the parking in kind of its current layout. There are some tweaks. So it's the same number of parking spaces that exist with more open space and an enhanced green space. So as was mentioned previously, the owner of 10 and 14 Blake, they've done their own concept plan, and there would be quite a bit more green space than currently exists today in their area. So I guess I would say it's like a hybrid. So it's not what Weston and Sampson proposed, but I don't think the town really has the appetite to spend $20 million on a parking garage at this point. So we're kind of trying to maintain the existing parking and then expand it where we can. So we do include on-street parking. Their proposal, Weston and Sampson's proposal, was a one-way street all the way through. The beta group looked at that and decided that the best configuration was to keep it as is. So it's a two-way configuration for most of the road and then one way in from Route 20. So I guess that's kind of a long drawn out way of saying it's a hybrid.
If I could just add one more thing, I agree with Julianne's point about burying utilities only because it's been always such a complaint about our town and a popular idea. And if we start to do it there, it may be what we can do as we redevelop other parts of town. So the $1 million price tag, I don't think is could be worth it to people to consider.
Let's take that under advisement, for the, as we come up on, we're going to have one more meeting of the focus group before the public meeting. We can sort of strategize a little bit how to how to present that particular issue. I don't know. I'll just lean back on you, Julianne, as a select board member in our committee and also the focus group. Um, about your feeling about, is that a can of worms that the select board would not mind being opened up at a public meeting like that, given the fact that there is a fairly significant price tag on it, just to get, if that starts to build enthusiasm in the general public that we really ought to go ahead and revisit spending this money. How is that going to be received, by the select board in terms of, dealing with that?
Well, I think that there's the board members who are fiscally very conservative. But I think in general, there's the I don't, I can only speak for myself and the few and the people I talk to, but if this project is not going to be $10,000, it's going to be expensive, and would it be worth an extra million to do it right? Well, I mean, it'll be done right anyway, but to do it in such a way that it will be even better, significantly. And so, the select board responds to the people, and that's why I suggested that we kind of get the temperature of, do people think that that makes enough of a difference to spend $1 million?
Yeah, I mean, I was disappointed when we got to some of the figures back as to what it would take just to do the analysis work by National Grid. But I mean, in my heart, I believe to really improve Blake Street with everything else we're doing, to get those utility poles out of there would make a big difference there. And as some people, as Gene mentioned, it could set the stage for doing that on a wider basis across the center of town, which would really help. So I'd love to see those utility poles disappear. So I would say that, we kick this around a little bit more at the next focus group meeting and put a plan together for how we present that at the public meeting. And maybe if you want to do a little background work with, with your compatriots on the select board, just give me a heads up that this is kind of circulating around, and there could be some discussion about asking for public opinion on, for this kind of money, do you think it's still a good idea? And you want to, so at least give people a heads up that this is kind of percolating and that, may come up at the meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Wonder if you just do the National Grid part of it. So like right now, I think, Lori, you're going to apply for grants. So maybe the grants will cover the polls and maybe it won't. But I wonder if Beta Group can do it both ways, because we're not building it. But there, if we get costs and it goes out to a grant, maybe they'll cover it.
No, the grants absolutely do not cover that. So
Okay.
they used to in the 1980s and I believe in the 1990s. And then they stopped doing it. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe it was just too complicated for them. But yeah, I know of no grants that pay for that.
Okay. How much of the Blake Street would a grant? I know it's a guess, but if you got a grant for Blake Street, do you guess it would cover 50% of the costs, or?
It's really hard for me to say. Because Northborough is a harder community to get grants for it because it's a wealthier community than the town of Millbury where I used to work. So I'm not exactly sure. I think that we have a really, really good case. And of course, we positioned our MBTA community to be directly adjacent. And there is a grant that was created for MBTA communities, and this project would be eligible. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to get some grant money, but I hesitate to say what percentage would be covered. So right now I'm grappling with how much money to ask for at town meeting. So I've been talking with the beta group and I told them that I really need a cost estimate soon because I have to prepare the warrant article and submit that. Right now, I'm thinking it'll be in the range of 1.5 million to $2 million.
Do the
So,
whole project?
for the Blake and Pierce Street project. So of course, I'm interested in get grant money as well, so it's possible that we may get more money in grants. So then we wouldn't have to pay as much as I would ask town meeting for. But I don't want to kill the project by, what if the grant applications aren't successful? Like I want to advance the project, so I want to have a significant amount covered. I'm confident about the complete streets, so that's 500,000. So I want to be able to make a significant dent in this project. If worse comes to worse, we could just do Blake Street and wait on Pierce Street until we do all of Pierce Street as a phase 2 project. But I want to ask for enough money to make this project a reality.
I suppose another way to look at this with the burying of the telephone poles is, let's say that we go with $1.5 million as being the estimated cost of doing the project without burying the telephone poles. So now it's a $2.5 million project if we want to bury the telephone poles. So what do people think about on a project of $1.5 million, increasing it by almost 100% to bury those 3 telephone poles?
Well, before we discuss that, so if you buried the poles, would that make the sidewalk project a little bit less expensive, less money?
No.
It
No,
would not help at all?
the benefit of burying the utilities as far as the sidewalk project is concerned is that now we wouldn't have to do bump outs around the utility poles. So, but we still have, there are still distances that you have to leave open from driveways.
Mhm.
So we still have that problem. And also from like roadways there, I believe roadways, you have to maintain 20-foot clearance from the roadway opening. Driveways, I think, is a smaller amount. So that would eliminate one of the problems, but not both.
But it wouldn't significantly change the cost.
No,
That's too bad.
it would significantly increase the cost overall.
Oh, yeah.
One of the products that the beta group is going to provide for the community meeting in the end of February is a perspective looking from Main Street down Blake Street. Perhaps we could ask them to provide the above ground and the below ground option of what that looks like. Because the way it is now, they're going to have to show the poles because we haven't told them that we want to spend the money to put them underground. But if you can see the difference that it would make to put them underground, it might spur some additional conversation and provide some credence to that cost estimate. So maybe we should talk about that at our next focus group meeting.
Sure.
That's a good idea.
All right, well, I think the point of tonight's item here was just to update the committee on what's going on with Blake Street. Like I said, there's a lot of good progress being made, and it seems like Beta Group is a very good partner we're working with. They've got a lot of good ideas, so we'll kick some of this stuff around at the next focus group meeting and kind of see exactly how we want to do this. And like I said, Julian, to the extent you can sort of get the temperature of the rest of your compatriots on the select board, about this, that would be helpful to sort of get a read on that before we decide how to present this at the public
Community.
meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, the next item on the agenda is the proposed letter from the MPIC to the planning board asking them to address some of the uh, goals in the master plan around housing, specifically through an updated housing production plan. So you got Amy and Jean and I worked since the last meeting on making some revisions to the memo. I think there was a general feeling that maybe it sounded too demanding, which wasn't the point. It was just to ask the planning board to consider, this particular goal of the master plan to do an updated housing production plan. And in doing that, a number of other housing goals in the plan could be rolled into that and done at the same time. So um, Jean and Amy and I went around 2 or 3 times on the original memo. Like I said, you had sent out to you the most recent version of it. I'd just be interested in feedback to that, and can we make the decision tonight that that particular version of the memo could be sent to Lori and to the planning board for their review? And then at that point, once we did that, our only mission and then would be to look for a follow-up at some point down the road to see what the reaction of the planning board was to the memo and what action they might want to take to it. So once again, much in the light of what we did with the Economic Development Forum, where we recommended a particular course of action, then it took a number of months before something actually happened. I would assume the same thing would happen here, that if we sent this letter to the planning board, we'd let some time go by, let the planning board read through it, discuss it. The letter does offer, if the planning board feels it appropriate, a discussion, with the MPIC about the letter, either at a planning board meeting or an MPIC meeting, or if not, that does not have to happen. The idea would be, though, it's just a way to provide some impetus towards some of these goals in the master plan. So I view this the same as what we did for the joint meeting of the land use boards around economic development. But anyway, I'll open up the floor to people's comments about the memo and the advisability of sending it.
Would anyone else like the letter put on the screen? Is that possible?
I can't, I don't do screen sharing. I don't know if Lori had.
Yeah, I can do that. It's just gonna take me a minute.
Thanks.
Question, Rick, and I mentioned it, but I don't think we discussed it, was my question with the letter. I thought it should go to the planning board, but have them look at all the goals of housing, not just a select few. And I guess my question for you, Rick, would be, why did you pick out certain goals for the planning board to review instead of just asking the planning board to review the housing goals?
Only because some of the goals under housing had some updates to them, that there was some activity underway. These ones did not have anything listed next to them as having any activity, and grouped together under the updated housing production plan. They seem to sort of fit together. So the reason I selected these were ones that under the update section really had nothing indicated as to what was going on. And they sort of fit nicely under, these are all things that be considered under a new housing production plan. That's kind of why I did it that way. Like I said, others did have activity on them.
Does anyone know if the state is done mandating increased housing yet?
Yeah, that'd be nice if we had a crystal ball for that. I think it depends on how successful their initiatives are. So I've heard rumors about other steps that they want to take, but possibly they're going to wait and see what happens with the MBTA. And of course, now they have the accessory dwelling bylaws that we have to change, and the merger regulation that we have to change. So Um, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. They like to spring things on us.
What is the merger acquisition thing?
So as part of the new housing laws that they passed, what's the way lots have been handled to date is that if you have a large lot, or two lots that are held in common, and you change your minimum lot size requirements or your frontage requirements. So now those two lots are no longer conforming. The way it works is you have 5 years to build on those lots. So you have a grandfathering protection for a period of 5 years. And then if you don't build on those lots within that 5-year time frame, then for zoning purposes, the lots merge. So when the building inspector looks at those lots, and when I look at those lots, they may have on paper two separate lots, but what we see is only one lot. So now what the state is saying is that as long as those lots have at least 10,000 square feet and I think 75 feet of frontage, then, and they are in a single family zoning district, they don't merge. So what they're saying is that you can, as long as the lots are used for a 3-bedroom house that has 1,850 square feet, then you can build 2 single-family houses on those lots. So we are working on a bylaw with the planning board. So we've discussed it a couple of times. We're gonna have a public hearing on our zoning amendments at the end of February or at the middle of February. I think it's February 17th. So what our proposal is we put some caveats on there. So what we're saying is that the lots have to comply with the uplands calculations. So they have to have a minimum of 50% uplands. They have to be served by public water and public sewer. And the latest thing that I haven't yet discussed with the planning board is I put in a caveat that said that they had to be affordable units, permanently deed restricted for low or moderate income households. So the state does give us the ability to put a little extra on there. So that's pretty much the proposal at this point. We're going to be talking about it on Tuesday night, so the planning board may make some changes, and then of course we're going to public hearing, so there may be some changes that come out of that, but that's where it stands at the time being.
Other thing I heard the state's looking into this year, and it wouldn't really affect us in our zoning. They're gonna do an inventory of all state-owned property that's not built on, and they want to use it for housing. They're gonna look into that. I think our state-owned property's already been built on. Is that down by, on Lyman Street? I think they built a maintenance facility for cars and
Decam.
trucks.
That,
Oh, yeah, the decam.
yeah.
But that was another, but they're definitely not done looking at what they want to do. There are other regulations they're looking that they might change.
Yeah, that's all true, but I think what the master plan was getting at was that given the fact that the last time a housing production plan was done was in 2012, it's time to sort of revisit where the town is on housing and where the town wants to go with housing kind of thing. I don't think that the assumption was that the housing production plan would produce a mandate to produce a certain amount of housing over a certain amount of time. I think back in the days when nobody was 40B compliant, people were doing these plans to sort of give them some breathing room while they figured out what they wanted to build. I think that what the master plan was indicating And what I think this would do would be just to give the town some time to sort of figure out where to go next and what to do. And that could talk about some significant amount of new housing, could talk about very little new housing, but would at least update the numbers as to where we are and what we need to do and what would make sense to do, which I think was kind of what the master plan was. The reason the master plan recommended updating the housing production plan was just to get current information and make some decisions, pretty much like like we're trying to do with economic development. Just take a kind of look at a current look at where the town is in housing and where the town needs to go with housing. And by doing that, some of these other issues, other goals being addressed could come up at the same time. So it'd be an opportunity to talk about what the demands of housing are in town and what the infrastructure needs to be and what the demand on infrastructure would be, what the demand on schools would be, where are we on that, and get some direction as to where to go and what to do around housing going forward. So it allows us to just sort of revisit where we are. A lot of people have a lot of opinions about housing in town, in favor or not in favor kind of thing. But I think right now the facts that we based our initial decisions are quite a bit old, and might be time to get some new facts.
So do we have to hire someone to do this inventory?
Yeah, we bring in, the way we've done in the past is we bring in a third party that knows how to do these kinds of things.
CMRPC does them too, right? I think I saw a scope. You guys already did a scope for it.
Yeah,
I think Lori attached it.
I had asked CMRPC to give us a scope and fee. And I emailed that to everybody a while ago.
Sorry,
I've got this, do you want me to pull up the letter at this point? I've got it all ready to go if
Well,
you want me to share it.
Why don't you bring it up?
One thing, Lori, is the scope called for a new housing committee. Like, we always talk about how there are so many committees and we need more people. I guess my concern would be, couldn't the planning board just do it? Like, I read the initial 2012 plan, and it really seems like you're just gonna have to update the numbers. I don't know about starting a whole new committee. That's just my,
Well, I think that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about tonight. I mean, the
yeah,
idea is, does this committee want to send this letter to the planning board and ask them to consider updating the housing production plan? Yes or no? And is
I'd like to,
this letter appropriate way of doing it?
I would ask the letter to have the planning board review all the housing, bullets, not just a few. But I can tell them that because I'm the planning board rep, so
Right.
no matter what the letter says, I can still just,
So I'm just gonna ask you, is the housing production plan proposal up on my screen, or is it that letter?
the letter.
Letter in a black box.
Okay, all right, so I've got the proposal up on my screen as well, so I can tell you the cost that CMRPC put forward. So hold on, I gotta move this over.
it was 26,000-ish. 25.
Yep, 25,000.
Lori, have you ever done in Millbury or in Northborough, have they ever done an impact on town services, which is the H3-1? Like, do we have an old one? Not that I'm saying I don't want a new one done, but I was just wondering, has there ever been an impact on town services in infrastructure related to housing study?
I've seen those done for specific projects. Like I'm sure when Avalon was proposed, they probably did something like that. But that's not typical for like housing in general. I've seen like cost of community services studies where they evaluate the cost. So the taxes that are generated from various types of uses, so they'll evaluate industrial uses, commercial uses, residential uses, open space, and then they compare how much each of those uses consume in services versus generate in income. And there were a number of those cost of community services studies that were done in the 1980s and the early 1990s. And what they determined at that time is that residential was a net drain on municipal coffers, whereas commercial and industrial was a net gain, and open space was neutral. So it really didn't consume anything in services, but it didn't generate tax revenue either. So is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I just was wondering if it had ever been done in Northborough, if you had already done it. I was just wondering if there was a plan I could read. I was just curious if it's ever been done before or if this would be a new plan.
I haven't seen one done townwide.
I think it would be good to do. Since we have, well, I won't say it now. I don't want to get into it because it's not for this meeting.
Oh, yeah. Once again, each of us, obviously, I've been involved in housing in a lot of different ways in town for a long time. And so when I read through our existing master plan to see what was being done and what wasn't being done, I was interested in reading the housing section of the plan. And so this is kind of what I came up with. I'm sure other people, when they read the plan, there may be other things that we may want to bring forward to the town at different times about other things. And I think we've talked about encouraging anybody on this committee to review the plan and to suggest other things that we might want to highlight and bring forward to the town. This is one that as a committee member and with an interest in housing that I'm bringing forward. So I guess the question here is, does the committee feel that this is a reasonable thing to ask the planning board to evaluate? Once again, the planning board can choose to respond in any number of different ways to this, a modified version of this, or yeah, it makes a good idea. It's a good idea, but the timing isn't right to do it now, or we think this is ridiculous. We're not going to do it at all. I mean, any of those answers are feasible, but that's not really up to us to decide. It's just that these are recommendations that were in the master plan that right now have no activity noted next to them as anything being done about. And like I said, I guess personally, because I've been involved in housing for a while, I have an interest in these particular set of goals and recommendations. And so as a member of this committee, I'm just bringing this forward to the committee as something that we could do as we did with economic development. So the purpose of the discussion tonight is, we've talked about this a couple of times now. I think we need to make a decision about whether we want to send this on to the planning board or not. If we need to take a vote, we can take a vote, but
Yeah, I mean, I'd
develop
agree
consensus.
with, because I agree with what Rick is saying. As a committee, we had a certain amount of success in fostering the economic development discussion. This letter does the same thing for housing. And with Amy and Millie on this committee and on the planning board, we would, as a committee, in my opinion, just rely on them to carry the ball, have the conversation, and report back to us on what the planning board's thoughts were on these various housing components. I agree with Amy. If there are other housing recommendations or strategies that could and should be included, by all means, have that conversation.
Other input from
And Rick,
board?
I also agree with you and Jean. I think to Amy's point though, where you listed out a few that you're highlighting, there's nothing wrong with saying attached to this memo was a copy of the master plan with additional housing priorities for your review, right? So that they know that these are not the only ones, these are just some highlighted ones. And again, as they develop new zoning bylaws and warrant articles, it's important that I mean, of course, Amy and Millie are on this committee, but it's important that all five of them remember that the master plan had some guidance in it and that they would then be referred back to it. So I'm in favor of sending it with maybe just changing that one sentence that says additional housing, priorities are in the master plan for your review.
Beyond the statement that says attached to this memo is a copy of the master plan housing chapter for review.
Yeah.
What else would you say?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't read where it said housing chapter. So the housing chapter is what I meant. Yes, so that's fine. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
I have those comments listed, Rick. I can make that change if you'd like.
Sure.
So I'm unfamiliar with the housing production plan that CMRPC will help us with. Will they do, study things like trends? Because lately I've been hearing that, young people are moving out of Massachusetts because they can move to places that are less expensive and work from home. And like, do they look at the whole picture? And as well as, anything that is coming from the state, like how those mandates are going to affect our housing? How
So what
broad is this?
they will look at trends. They'll look at a gap analysis. So they'll look at the various household sizes. They'll look at the condition of the housing stock. They'll look at housing affordability for renters and ownership. They'll look at the affordable housing stock, how many units there are, the waiting list that the housing authority may have. So it really does run the gamut. They look at population trends, the aging population.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and then they also do public outreach. So they will reach out to the community to kind of see what type of housing people would like to see and where they would like to see it. And then they would make a variety of recommendations. So they would do an analysis of our zoning. So if they see that there are impediments to certain types of housing, they would probably bring that up in the analysis of needs section.
Mhm.
And then they'll make recommendations.
Oh, okay.
And they'll also look at infrastructure too. So they'll look at sewer availability, water availability, stuff like that. I've done a couple of these housing plans. So it could be something that is done in-house. But unfortunately, with the load of committees that I have, there's no way I would have the time. It would probably take me 10 years to get it done. So it's not from a lack of ability
Mhm.
that I'd be interested in farming out. It's from the lack of time.
No, it sounds like an awful lot of work. So,
It is.
and good information that will come from it.
I do think it should be, I know they're not gonna do it this year anyways, but I do think it should be put off a year or two just to see what's coming down from the state. Because you would want to include all the latest and greatest. And I think everybody's in flux right now, trying to figure out what is coming down the pike.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. Once again, the letter doesn't ask for anything to be done at any particular point in time. It just indicates that these are items in the master plan that don't have any activity on them at this point, and to get feedback from the planning board as to how they might address it, or if they would address it. Like I said, a valid response is, we're not going to address it. And the master plan would say, for this particular goal, it's not going to be done. But I mean, I won't, that's probably not where we're going to end up, but I'm just saying the letter isn't really asking anything except to point out the fact that there are some items in the master plan around housing that have had no activity at this point, and the committee feels it's appropriate to have the planning board at least assess how to proceed against these particular goals or anything else that's in this attached copy of the housing chapter for their review. And what we would do is if 6 months go by and nobody said anything, we'd probably ask again about, remember the email we sent you? You know, what do you think what decisions you made about it? So at least at some point expect a response. Doesn't have to be an immediate response. And I think Jean raises a good point that with Millie and Amy on the committee, it's something from time to time they could just sort of report back. There wouldn't have to be a formal meeting or a formal memo back from the planning board, but just from time to time, Millie and or Amy, could provide some information about what's being discussed about the letter.
Definitely, we've been talking about housing for the last 2 years, just because of everything coming through the state. Probably attended over 20, 30 hours of forums and meetings last month alone about housing. So it's definitely been on the forefront. We haven't discussed doing a housing production plan. We're just trying to keep up with what's coming out.
Right. Is there anyone on the committee who's opposed to having this letter go from the committee to the planning board sometime, in the next week or so, after we complete this meeting? If Lori could make, there are any kind of modifications to the text, Lori could put those in, and Amy and Jean and I have sort of become sort of the ad hoc committee for this letter. So if there's any other changes, Amy and Jean and I could review it one more time. But if the committee's in agreement, the plan would be that sometime in the next couple of weeks, Lori would basically send this memo to herself and the planning board. Is there any objection to that?
I'm just going to raise the question whether we as a committee should take a vote as opposed to just say proceed. I sort of have a nagging memory of the downtown planning process where we, as a group, would discuss a variety of things and they would sort of drift off into the ether. And then the consultant would come back and maybe tangentially address it or not address it. And there was a lack of votes to give direction, I think, in my opinion, to that consultant. So I'm just raising the question whether we as a committee should take a vote on this letter and support, or whether the members don't think it's really necessary.
I agree with you, Jean. Let's dot our I's and cross our T's. And I just have to say one more thing. I think it's fine to send the letter, but with the understanding that if the planning board feels that they want to see what the state is going to mandate us to do before they act on this, I think that's reasonable. So, and the letter doesn't say, please address this in the next 3 months. So
Right.
Knowing that there's a lot of flexibility there, I think it's fine. But I think we should have a vote.
All right, Alan, would you like to present a motion, Jean, on the floor for us to vote on?
Well, I just make a motion that the Master Plan Implementation Committee vote to approve this letter and authorize that it be sent to the planning board.
Is there a
Second.
second for that?
Second.
Okay, we'll take a vote on that. I'm assuming there's no more discussion at this point, but I guess as the chair of the board, I should say, is there any more discussion before we vote? Hearing none. Julianne,
Yes.
Amy.
I'm gonna abstain because I'm on the board,
Well, you're on the
Seems
committee, though. You're on the committee also, though.
I
So I
know.
think you need to vote.
I don't know.
Yes or no?
I'm gonna abstain.
Okay. Fran,
Yes.
Gene Kennedy,
Yes.
Gene Cahill,
Yes.
Rick Leaf says yes. John Campbell, you still with us?
No, we lost the
Disappeared into
connection.
the ether. Jen?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, majority votes in favor with one abstention. So if there's one more modification you want to make, Lori, why don't you make that and send that back to Gene and Amy and I just for final approval, and then we'll go ahead and send a letter at your convenience to you and to Kerry.
Okay.
Good, thanks very much. Okay, next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from November 21st, which were sent to us. Are there any changes or modifications to those minutes? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the minutes for November 21st, 2024?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second,
Julianne?
Aye.
Amy?
Aye.
Fran?
aye.
Gene Kennedy?
Aye.
Gene Cahill?
Aye.
Rick Leaf votes aye, and Jen Tolman?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes from November 21st are approved. Is there anything else to come before this important body tonight? Hearing none. All right.
Two more months, is that when we meet again?
Your next meeting will be March 16th, will be the next meeting. Okay, thanks to everybody for joining in tonight, and have a good couple of months, and we'll see you in March.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good night,
Yeah.
Bye.
everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.